Hello class. Today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting mixed numbers with a twist. So let's review what are the steps that we follow in order to add or subtract fractions. Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to remember to find a common denominator. You've got to make the bottom numbers alike. Second thing is change your numerator to match. Whatever you did to your bottom number, you must do the same thing to the top number. Then you have to add or subtract your numerators or your top numbers. Keep your new denominator. And then last but not least, you need to simplify. So let's see if we can try that real fast. Okay, so here are two questions. I want us to follow those procedures. Step number one, find a common denominator. So in this first one, we've got 3/8 plus 5/12. So what I like to do is rewrite the entire problem. I don't want to just scratch out and write new denominators and things of that nature. So to find our new denominator, I start with my largest denominator, which is 12. And I ask myself, can I change this 8 into a 12 using multiplication? And I can't. Okay, so I take the 12 and I do its second multiple, which is 12 times 2, which is 24. And then ask the same question again. Can I turn the 8 into a 24 with multiplication? And yes, you can. So 24 becomes our common denominator. And it happens to be the least common denominator. It's the smallest denominator we can have there with an 8 or a 12. So now we have to change our numerators to match. So that means, how did I change this 8 to a 24? Well, I multiplied it by 3. So I need to do the same thing to the top number. So my new numerator is a 9. For the 12, I asked, how did I go from 12 to 24? Well, we multiplied by 2. So I do the same thing to the 5. 5 times 2 is 10. So now, once we're done with that, we have found our common denominator. We've changed our numerator to match. We're now ready to add or subtract our numerators. So 9 plus 10 gives us 19. Step 4 is keep your new denominator. And then step 5 is to attempt to simplify. So I keep the new denominator of 24. And we ask, is 19 over 24 simplified? And it is. Well, with subtraction, we do the same exact process. Okay, we start by finding a common denominator. The one between 5 and 3 will be 15. How did I go from 5 to 15? I multiplied by 3. Do the same thing to the 4. You end up with 12. Okay, how did I go from 3 to 15? I multiplied by 5, so I multiply the 2 by 5. So 2 times 5 is 10. And now what we have to remember to do instead, like we added over here, we did 9 plus 10. Here I have to subtract. 12 take away 10 is 2 over 15. And you can't simplify. So that's how we add or subtract fractions. But our lesson today is about mixed numbers. Okay, so what would be the one step you think that we would add for mixed numbers? Well, we would start off exactly the same. Still find a common denominator, change our numerators to match, add or subtract our numerators, keep our new denominators, but we're going to add a new step 5. And that is add your whole parts, add your whole numbers, and then simplify. So let's see if we can do a few questions like that. So here's our first one. Okay, so it's just a mixed number, 5 3/4 plus 6 5/8. We start off this problem exactly the same that we did the last two. We start by finding a common denominator. So we have 5 with a new fraction bar plus 6 with a new fraction bar. So we look at our 8 and we ask, can I turn the 4 into an 8 through multiplication? Yes, we can. So it becomes our common denominator. You could have used 16 as well, or 32. All of those are common denominators as well, common multiples of 4 and 8. So now we change our numerators. 4 times 2 got me 8, so 3 times 2 gets me 6. This one I didn't do anything, so I don't do anything to the top number. Okay, so now we add. 6 plus 5 gives us 11. We keep the 8, and then we add our whole parts. 5 and 6 make 11. Now, because this is 11/8, it's an improper fraction, so it's not simplified. So we have to simplify that. Now, this is nothing but a division problem. So if you need to actually see the simplifying, well, then you take the 11 and you divide it by the 8, because it's top in, bottom out. So we ask, how many times does 8 go into 11? One time. We multiply. 1 times 8 is 8. We subtract. We get 3. So when we simplify 11 and 1/8, we end up with 11 over 8. We get 1, and we take our number that we have left over. It becomes our numerator, and the number that you divided by stays the denominator. So this is really 11 plus 1 3/8. So when we put that together, the 11 and the 1 can go together to make 12, and we have 3/8 left over. Now all this simplifying down here on the bottom, I don't have to see that on your paper. Okay, if you can say that 11 over 8, 8 goes into 11 one whole time, we add that 1 into the 11 to make a 12. We subtract 11 and 8 to get 3, and it's still over 8. That's what I want to see. All right? So let's try another one. What about subtraction? Would we do it the same way? Of course we would. Okay, so let's start with this one. Okay, again, we find common denominator. So 9 bar minus 4 bar. So 9, can I turn the 6 into a 9? No. 9 times 2 is 18. Can I turn the 6 into an 18? Yes. Okay, so we've got our common denominators now. So now we change our numerators. How did I go from 9 to 18? Multiplied by 2. So I multiply the 7 by 2 to get 14. How did I change the 6 into an 18? Times 3. So I multiply the 1 by 3 and get 3. Okay, so now we subtract. 14 take away 3 gives us 11 over 18. And then 9 take away 4 is 5. Can I simplify that anymore? No. Now, that's the level that I expected you to get to coming into my class. That was the knowledge, or the prior knowledge, that you needed. Now let's bump it up to this class's expectation. Okay, here's our next problem. And you'll notice what's different about this one is there are negatives. Okay, so now we're going to mix our integer rules and our fraction rules together. Okay, so in order to do that, the first thing you've got to understand is, okay, there is a negative. So we think back to our addition rules, or our integer rules. And they said if the signs are alike, then we add our numbers together. If our signs are different, we subtract our numbers. So this 8 5/8 is a positive, and the 3/2 is a negative. So my signs are different, so that means I subtract. Okay, now, so this problem then, we'll work it exactly the way we did this one. It's the same process. So we start off by finding the common denominator. So we get 8 fraction bar, and then 3 fraction bar. And if you want to kind of help you remember that we are subtracting here, when you're doing the work, just change that to a subtraction problem. We will still have to look back at the integer rule at the very end of the problem, but just to kind of help you, go ahead and make that a subtraction problem, because that's what we're actually doing with the fractions. Okay, so the 8 is my largest denominator. Can I turn the 2 into an 8? Yes. So 8, 8, change my numerators. This one stayed the same. This one I multiplied by 4. Do the same thing to the 1, and I get 4. Okay, so now I subtract. 5 take away 4 is 1 over 8. 8 take away 3 is 5. So we got 5 and 1/8. Now, the last thing we have to do when we're dealing with integer rules with fractions is you got to look back and find out which one of these fractions actually is farthest from 0. The 8 5/8 is the farthest from 0, so it's a positive 5 1/8. Okay, so let's try another one. Try another one like this. Okay, so now we've got positives and negatives, but we have a minus problem. In this subtraction problem, we've got to remember to change subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. Now you'll notice both of the numbers are negative, and it's a plus problem. So that means we add our numbers together. Okay, so 5, oh, not there. We got 5, I don't want that number there yet, and then plus 4, that number, and we look at our common denominator. We got 5 and 4, so immediately we know our common denominator is going to be 20. Now we change our numerators, times 4 is 8, times 5 is 15, and now we add them together. 8 and 15 make 23 over 20, and then 5 and 4 make 9. Now, can we simplify that? Yes. How many times does 20 go into 23? Once. So that adds to the 9 to make 10. And we have 3 left over. Now we've got to remember one thing when we get done with the problem. We're dealing with positive and negative mixed numbers. So we've got to look back at our problem and find out what kind of an answer am I going to have. Well, this number, the first number is a negative. The second number is a negative. So when we think back to our adding rules, negatives plus more negatives gives me a negative. And we end up with a negative 10 and 3/20 as an answer. Now I got one more problem for you. There's one type of problem that in order to be able to do fractions, you've got to be able to do it. And it's the hardest fraction problem there is that I can give you. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so what if I gave you 14 and 1/2 minus 6 and 7/8? Okay, this is the hardest fraction problem I can give you. Some of you may ask, why? Well, we'll find out. Well, it is subtraction, so it doesn't have any negatives in there, so we're good. So we start with our common denominator. So 14, 6, okay, so we've got an 8 and a 2, so our common denominator is 8. Okay, so now this one multiplied by 4, we end up with 14 and 4/8. This one I leave it alone and we get 7. Now what we have here is we've got a subtraction problem, and I have 4 take away 7. We can't do that, so you have to borrow. So what you're going to do is you're going to come to the 14 and you're going to borrow from the 14, and it will become a 13. Okay, now the fraction that we've got here still has to have an 8 on the bottom because we've got to have common denominators. But to get your new numerator when you borrow is you're going to take the 8 and the 4 and just add them together, and that gives us 12. But the reason why we do that is this numerator is now big enough I can subtract this numerator from it, and that's what we're looking for. So now I do 12 take away 7, which gives me 5 over 8, and then 13 take away 6 gives me 7. And we can't simplify, so we're done. So what we've talked about today is how do I add and subtract mixed numbers with integers or with negative numbers. Okay, we've got 5 basic steps or 6 basic steps that we follow when we're working with mixed numbers. Step number 1 is always find a common denominator. And then change your numerator to match. Whatever you did to your bottom, you must do to the top. Add or subtract your numerators, keep your denominator, add your whole parts or subtract your whole parts, and then simplify. But we've also got to think about if we have integers in the mix, we've got to remember our integer rules. We've got to remember what we have to do if both numbers are alike, or if one is negative and it's an addition problem, or if it's a subtraction problem. We have to remember to change subtraction to addition next to its opposite and then determine what we need to do. So until next time,